Finally, talk radio that doesn't kiss corporate ass.
Ha ha! Yes! Score! Score!
This is TalkNetwork.com. This is TalkNetwork.com.
For Talk Network News, I'm Don Naylor. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says the U.S. hopes Canada will continue to be a part of the anti-Islamic State group coalition, despite what Trudeau said on the campaign trail about withdrawing Canada warplanes from the fight.
They've made an important contribution thus far, and we're obviously deeply appreciative of them lending their talent and skill and expertise to that effort. And we hope that we can continue to count on their ongoing support for this very important mission.
Vice President Joe Biden says he won't be a candidate in the coming campaign, but if Democrats are smart, they'll embrace the legacy that he and President Obama have built.
Democrats should not only defend this record and protect this record, they should run on the record.
House Speaker John Boehner says he expects Paul Ryan will get the necessary backing to become Speaker.
He works hard, he's very bright, and he has good relationships, I think, with all the wings of the party. So that's why I think he'll be doing fine.
British Prime Minister David Cameron confirms that a British company has reached an agreement with a Chinese corporation to build a nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point in West England.
And I'm pleased to announce today that we're signing an historic deal to build the Hinkley nuclear power station, providing reliable, affordable energy for nearly 6 million homes and creating more than 25,000 jobs, all the while working together to build a low-carbon future.
And NYPD Commissioner William Bratton says a New York City police officer died after being shot in the head while pursuing a suspect.
I regret to inform you that New York City police officer Randolph Holder, 33 years of age, badge number 13340, a 5-year veteran of the New York City Police Department, was killed in the line of duty, murdered.
For details on these stories and more, go to TalkNetwork.com.
Gold and silver have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for personal wealth and protection. Precious metals are an excellent way to hedge against risky markets and uncertain times, and also provides a low-profile asset for enhanced financial privacy. IDP Consulting Group specializes in pure bullion products for physical delivery and commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. As an asset class, precious metals can never go to zero and have the potential to reward smart investors as global markets increasingly threaten conventional investment strategies. You can call IDP Consulting Group to learn more at 855-860-6800 or visit their website at idpconsultinggroup.com. Payment terms are easy and simple, and IDP promptly and discreetly ships all orders within the continental U.S. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 and put a gold and silver lining in your portfolio today.
You, my guardian angel, take my soul of fire.
You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the deeper messages, symbols, and predictive programming subtexts that underlie modern film. In this show, we will be interviewing artists, experts, and numerous people in media fields. And this will all be based on my years of research in comparative religion, propaganda, psychological warfare, secret societies, and espionage. Esoteric Hollywood decodes the biggest movies in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with completely new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I am your host, Jay Dyer from jaysanalysis.com. You're listening to TalkNetwork.com. If you go to the link j.talknetwork.com, you'll find a whole bunch of organic supplements and products that you absolutely have to check out. So definitely check out Natural News, especially as we get towards this holiday season. Today, my guest is James Kelley, no stranger to Jay's analysis. We've spoken at length about cults, and today James and I are going to be talking cults in Hollywood. James, how are you?
Great. How are you doing, Jay?
Doing very well. So we're going to start with, I guess, The Master. This is a film that came out in 2012 by P.T. Anderson of, say, Magnolia fame. What's your initial assessment of this, if you want to just dive into it?
Sure. I mean, to me, The Master, it's obvious to all that there's a reference to L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology in the character of Lancaster Dodd and
right.
The Cause. And the question arises, though, is P.T. Anderson simply trying to formulate a satire or critique of Scientology, or is he trying to just use it thematically to make a point of his own, a larger point? And I think it's the latter, because I think that the main character, Freddie Quell, he comes into contact with The Cause, but I think ultimately it just serves as more or less a backdrop for Freddie Quell to find that, just as his would-be love interest Doris goes away to Holland and he takes an even bigger journey away from the problem, that he has to come back to that, and that you can't just mimic when someone comes away from you or goes away from you. You don't simply take a bigger journey away. You have to face up to that and engage with the person that you're wanting to have the relationship with. So I do see the movie as not having to make the choice of is Scientology / The Cause good or bad. Mm-hmm. It's more of a thematic thing.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Scientology itself before we continue with the film The Master. Now, you've done quite a bit of research on this, and you and I had a conversation about it not too long ago. But for listeners out there who may not be familiar with this, and since we're talking esoteric Hollywood, let's talk about how this ties into Hollywood. Maybe just a few minutes on Hubbard and Scientology. Give us a rundown of this strange, I guess we could call it a religion.
Yes, in a nutshell, Scientology is the creation of L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron got into what we might call mind cure. Mm-hmm. He got into the idea that, you have psychology, psychiatry, but that you need a more direct and more, I guess you could say, more pragmatic approach to the mind, which said, yes, you do have a soul, but you have these memories from previous lives, these engrams, which are keeping you from understanding your own goals and understanding how to relate to the world around you. So he created this therapy, L. Ron Hubbard did, auditing, designed to get rid of these bad memories, to get rid of these insistments of past experiences that get in the way of you surviving to your utmost.
So not just a matter of like psychoanalytical approaches to past trauma, but past life trauma.
Oh, sure. As a matter of fact, the number one enemy for Scientologists is psychiatry, mm-hmm. because the claim is that, psychiatry does not base itself on workable ideas. It doesn't base itself on, people get better and actually are completely cured of their mental hangups if we do this. It's based more on literary fancies of a man named Sigmund Freud, according to Hubbard, and it doesn't have, Hubbard said basically people can be in analysis for 20 years and never get better, so how is that good? How is that effective? So it kind of mixed together this whole idea of, what's true is what works.
Yeah.
The whole American pragmatist thing. And he said, we have to apply this to the mind of man in mind cure, and mind works, he claimed.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that pragmatism element, because that's going to play into Schizopolis, the Soderbergh film that we're going to talk about. Cronenberg film we're going to talk about.
It is Soderbergh.
Oh, excuse me. getting a little mixed up here.
Cronenberg myself at one point, actually. So.
Yeah. Well, so tell us, though, a little bit more about the outlandish aspects of it, because it's not just a self-help kind of anti-psychiatry approach. It's also got this elaborate exotheology.
Well, since we're doing esotericism in Hollywood, I think I should just give a few minutes about that, and then also
that'd be great.
Yeah, what Hubbard claimed is that the true person is a thetan, a spiritual entity which preceded the material universe. It's a spiritual entity, and in order to have a relation with other thetans, other spiritual entities, it had to create a game. And the game was based on, well, let's forget about the fact we can do all things at all times, and let's limit ourselves so that there's a lower realm that we both agree on. That would be matter, energy, space, time, messed. And so what happens is that the thetans basically, actually, literally forget that they are thetans, certain ones, and they end up being trapped by the images that they created. Because Hubbard says basically all of these games are based on these facsimiles, these images of things that might happen. So it's like a Hollywood film. And what happens, he thinks, in the reality that you and I know, is that thetans have been trapped in matter, and they've forgotten that everything is just a big Hollywood film in a sense, in a cosmic sense. And so they begin to live by these narratives that the film itself is imposing on you. Now, we all know about the Xenu thing. Well, the whole idea of the Xenu myth that Hubbard purveyed is that this evil leader named Xenu trapped a lot of thetans and gave them a comic strip, trapped them into a kind of a multiplex cinema, if you will, and showed them a film, which he called R6, which showed Christ on the cross and then another man underneath the cross in the rain with a rat being sick. And the whole image was that, in order to survive, you have to die. In order to survive, you have to kill. In order to survive, you have to have pain. And so for Hubbard, he says that's what we're all trapped in. So he wanted to create a different Hollywood film, if you will, literally and also figuratively, so that people could get out from underneath this R6 imagery.
And when you say he wanted to create a different film, are you speaking of his view of how he could construct a new narrative for reality for his followers?
Sure, because whenever you did auditing, he would say, you need to be able to mock up or imagine this image. Imagine yourself doing this. Remember in The Master where he says, touch the wood and he tells Freddie Quell to touch the wood.
Yeah.
And then he touches the window and he says, I can go anywhere. I can touch the sun and the stars, or I can go anywhere and touch the stars. And then he says, application ended. Well, the whole idea is that even though you're entrapped in this existence, in this space-time configuration, then it's utterly by your choice in a way. If you trace it back to the origin, then you are a thetan that willed this into being. And so Freddie Quell says, I choose to be here. I choose to be here in between this wall and this window.
Interesting, too, a little play on reality in the real world is the fact that Anderson chose Joaquin Phoenix, who actually did grow up in a cult. I think you and I mentioned in the past, I don't know if you ever looked into the Family of God cult with Moses Berg, but yeah, that is the Phoenix family were raised in that cult, and so it was a very similar type of situation to Scientology. It was a cult that grew out of the Jesus People movement of the 70s and became the Family of God or the Children of God. And this was very much it had a lot of tie-ins to Hollywood circles. Rose McGowan, for example, was raised in this cult as well. So interesting that the choice would be of Quell being played by Joaquin.
Absolutely. I wasn't aware of all that, though I now remember us mentioning that. But another thing is that the whole Hubbard's whole filmic, view of things. He's going to give you a new film. Well, and then also his actual belief that there was a film-like implant in all of our minds called R6. Okay.
Wow.
He actually also tried to become a filmmaker.
Right.
He actually, in his later days, well, in his youth, I should first say, he was friends with Richard DeMille, Cecil B. DeMille's son, and actually wanted to use that to make inroads into Hollywood. And later on, he built his own, or he had a studio built for him to make films, training films for Scientology. And at this time, he was breaking down internally, I think, according to a lot of people, and was having phobias where people and crying and throwing fits. And ironically, he looked a lot like a Hollywood director, as he was having his mental breakdown. I'm sure it was hard to distinguish between someone actually losing their mind and then directing a Hollywood film. He seemed to fit in rather well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if we look at The Master, there's all kinds of parallels that I think make it obvious that Anderson is referring to Hubbard and Scientology. For example, the character Lancaster Dodd, played by Philip Seymour, has a huge yacht.
Yeah.
Right, so that's an oblique reference to, I guess, Sea Org. And I like the way that, as you and I discussed, that it seems to present the ability of this cult to have its attraction through the filling in of the missing archetypes in a person's life. And so the reason Quell is a drifter is that he's lacking a father figure. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And he's missing his father's died of alcoholism.
Right.
And then Quell himself makes this homemade vodka, this mystery brew, and he gives it to Dodd, the L. Ron Hubbard character. And keep in mind, when Dodd first takes a drink, then he says, he obviously shudders and says, "Oh, God." And that's, I believe, an oblique reference to Hubbard's own lecture that he gave called the Assist Lecture.
Oh, wow.
Hubbard's talking about what happens when you give a person an auditing assist, which gets rid of some body thetans, which means it gets rid of some of their engrams, some of their problems. And this is a direct quote, and I'll try to mimic.
Well, hold that quote if we're going to take a quick break here. And you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood with James Kelley.
Captain Obvious takes listener questions today. Welcome, caller. What's your question?
I've been eating so much chlorella that my poop has turned green. What should I do?
It's simple. Drink beet juice to add red to your diet, and you can produce Christmas colors.
Wow, I never knew that.
Next caller, you're up with Captain Obvious.
Hello, Captain Obvious. I haven't been able to get the energy to vote since about 1996.
Oh, you have electile dysfunction.
Well, I guess so. I keep trying to pull the lever, but nothing happens.
Well, you've probably got hanging Chad's disorder. Next time, vote with your feet.
Hello, I'm a gender-confused university student, and I don't know if I should use the women's restroom or the men's restroom.
That's easy. Reach down your pants and tell me what's there.
Shame?
Ah, yes, you're suffering from an overdose of political correctness. Your prescription is to listen to TalkNetwork.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. You're listening to TalkNetwork.com. I'm talking to James Kelley, who is the author of the book Anatomizing Divinity. So if you like what you're hearing, James has an excellent treatise that deals with the history of Hermeticism in the Western tradition that you can obtain from Amazon that I highly recommend. I read the book several years ago, and definitely something that impacted my thinking, my worldview. So definitely check out his book, and we're discussing Scientology, cults, and Hollywood, and particularly L. Ron Hubbard, and right now the film The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson. So you had a quote for us, James. Go ahead and continue that.
Sure. So Freddie gives to Lancaster Dodd the mystery brew, which causes a full-body shudder and an, "Oh, God." And I believe that's actually a quotation or a mimicking of what Hubbard says in his Assist lecture that he did, where here's the direct quote, and I'll try to mimic what Hubbard did. He says, and he's mimicking what the person who's gotten the assist and their sense of relief. It's, "Yes, oh, that's great. Oh, my God, what a relief. Oh God." So it's obvious that we're dealing with something that the adjective orgasmic could definitely.
Yeah, right.
And later on in The Master, you have the next body shudder is definitely a literal orgasm that's administered, if you will, by the fondlings of Mary Sue.
Yes, I forgot that scene, right.
Yeah, the sink. So I think that the parallel is made there by P.T. Anderson, and it's an oblique reference to the Assist lecture, which says this is what the Scientology process is going to do for you. It's going to give you the oh God.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us, one thing I think was interesting about this film was that it does show the play on people's weaknesses, and that's what happens in cults and in mind control, is that you have this sort of profiling where you find out what the person's weak points are so that you can manipulate them. And that's what happens with Quell in terms of his ne'er-do-well, listless status and his alcoholism. And so this is kind of a programming thing. So tell us, what did Hubbard and Scientology think about sexuality and things like addictions? And did they use this? I've even read that sort of their treatment program with taking all this niacin, is itself kind of a dubious situation that maybe puts you in a state of being suggestible.
Sure. I mean, with Scientology, the whole idea was that, Roman Catholicism, you confess to the priest, but nobody else knows about it. In Scientology, anyone who's on the inside, anyone who's an administrator, anyone who is a clear, in other words, someone who's been successfully audited, they may or may not go through your auditing files. So you give sort of confessions to your auditor. They're written down, transcribed, recorded, or they can be, and then they can be used against you later. Now, of course, they're going to spin it and say, this is to help you further. We have to have an exact record of what your auditing session is so that we can get you to the next level.
Well, but if you've seen that documentary that was made based on, I think, Wright is the author, his book.
Yeah, Lawrence Wright.
Going Clear, it's very clear in that documentary that the dirt is used for blackmail.
Sure. I mean, because the whole logic seems to be like this, and this carries on with a lot of different cult groups, is we're going to, in an open-minded, with open arms, present the truth to the world, but guardedly, because we know that narrow is the way, and we're going to be rejected by some people who are simply beyond help. So what happens when the inevitable rejection comes, like Om Shinrikyo in Japan, where he runs for the equivalent of congressman and he's mocked in the media. Well, I mean, he offered them salvation. He offered them the answer, and they scorned him. They spit in his face. So then you have to have the nastier tactics. It's like Hubbard said one time. He said, there's going to have to be a lot of ethics. And when he says ethics, he means these security checks, using these tactics of information against the person. There's going to have to be a lot more ethics in this world before we get it back on track. So what he meant was, we're going to have to put the screws down on people a little bit more, be a little bit nastier, a little bit more ruthless. And that can mean, turning people against their family members, using information against them, like they do with Freddie Quell, like the cause does.
Yeah.
When it asks him all these personal questions. Have you ever had sex with a family member?
Right.
And it's under the guise of, this is a game where can you be honest with yourself, and can you be brave?
Yeah, let me read you a quick quote of what I wrote in my analysis and tell me if you agree with it. Quell's conditioning, termed in the film processing, is eerily reminiscent of trauma-based mind control. In fact, the film is really about Dodd learning to become a charismatic, slimy master of human manipulation. The individual's identity and meaning is thus bound up with this cult and its pseudo-familial structure. The cult's imagined dogma thus provides a narrative story and explanation for one's life, as well as, in this case, an even cosmic purpose. All the universe's meaning and focus is channeled into the wild dreams of the creative and charismatic cult leader, leading to a prideful sense of galactic privilege. The cult thus appeals to all of man's base and higher desires, as Quell is manipulated by both. In a word, control is the name of the game, and the mind is treated as a computer that is rebooted and programmed. Or, as you put, a movie screen.
Very good. I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think of the name of Freddie Quell. He's trying to quell...
Quell, exactly.
Yeah, he's trying to quell these drives, and to say, how can these, something's going on in my life, the relationship with family and particularly the love interest has not gone well. Why is that? And I think that what the master says is, look, Freddie Quell comes into contact with the cause. The cause, as a whole, tries to break him and say, no, you have to completely give over your open-ended quest for your own self-fulfillment and realize that it's from this one man that comes the answer for all things. And Freddie Quell says, well, I like this Lancaster Dodd because he's not saying like the closed-minded, scientific-minded person at the socialite's house, who believes he has the answers before he asks them, and who says, well, we have to get together in a scientific forum and compare our results. No, Lancaster Dodd says you have a personal, individual truth that you have to find. And that much Freddie latches onto that, but it's just the dogma that Dodd throws at him. He eventually says, no, I can't. I have to take the motorcycle and ride away from you. And but taking that knowledge, taking that insight that I have to find what's true for me. And Hubbard did actually say that. You have to find out what's true for you. So I think that what Anderson's doing is saying, look, there's a truth to be taken from Hubbard. It's definitely not joining Scientology. That's not the answer.
Right.
But there's something, it answered some kind of yearning. And you just have to fill that yearning up with some kind of appropriate content. It's certainly not Scientology.
Yes, it's. I like the quell point. It almost makes me think of Quaaludes.
Oh, I didn't think of that. Yeah, definitely.
Well, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously that's not about that. But you have a great point there about quelling the desire, the lack that we have in our psyche or our soul or whatever. So.
Yeah, just the drives that are going in every direction, and you have to channel them in some direction. How are you going to do that?
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us a little more about Hubbard himself and filming. What kind of stuff did he actually put together?
Sure. Well, interestingly enough, whenever he got his film studio together in the desert of California, he actually wrote about 15 scripts. One of them was actually a dramatization of the Xenu Myth, which is weird. Yeah, it never got produced, it never got filmed, but it named, because the Xenu Myth says that there were these loyal masters who were like the senatorial class of all Thetans, and they elected Xenu as the supreme ruler, as we said last time when we spoke, but that Xenu goofed the floof, as Hubbard put it, and imprisoned everyone in the R6 movie theaters, as we said.
Goofed the floof?
Yes.
It's weird how all these cult leaders have this really weird play with language with this. They'll say really bizarre things. Like you and I had an interview where we discussed Jim Jones, and he talked about the dinghies, that humans were sort of the flatulent, scatological offspring of God.
Oh yeah, he said that Jim Jones said that there was that the etymology of Lucifer was loose fart, and that and he went on from there saying that he wants us just to be the leavings of a higher being that just says yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, like slaves.
Yeah, so we see this tendency of this, and I think people have pointed this out in studies in regard to psychopaths as well, that they have this very strange play with language where they will sort of invent terms and so forth.
Oh, absolutely. To me, it's like this. You're not looking, a person who's an academic or someone who's interested in high culture, they may be looking for someone to give them an analysis of Hegel or something like that. However, what reaches people across the spectrum is when someone says, hey, I'm just a guy like you. I'm just going to tell you how to do it, and it's not going to go so far above your head that you can't understand it. I'm going to throw some new words at you, but if you just hang with me, these are words that you know. And I'm just going to give them a slightly different meaning, which is going to be apparent. And so everyone across the board, or a large swath of the population, is able to say, yes, this is something I can understand.
Right, so the cult leader needs to have that ability to sprinkle and pepper his jargon with obscure mystical terms, playful jargon, playful terms, and then also have, at the same time, a mass appeal.
Sure, it's like in the Master.
Well, James, hold that. We're going to come right back after this break.
If you currently have an IRA account or qualified plan, you can easily convert these funds into a precious metals IRA for safekeeping and peace of mind. A transfer or rollover is a penalty-free transaction and can provide for significant tax-deferred capital gains with low annual fees. For prudent investors seeking safety, flexibility, liquidity, and historic opportunity is waiting for you. And the professionals at IDP Consulting Group can assist you with your IRA needs by calling 855-860-6800 or visiting their website at idpconsultinggroup.com. A Precious Metals IRA allows you to fund your IRA with pure gold and silver that is securely held in a fully insured and segregated institutional account. If you have an existing IRA or qualified plan and want to learn more about this strategic alternative, call IDP Consulting Group at 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 for a no-obligation consultation to discuss your personal needs today.
Hi, this is the Health Ranger here with the Health Minute brought to you by store.talknetwork.com. The question today is, what is astaxanthin? Well, astaxanthin is an amazing nutritional supplement made by single-celled microorganisms. It is what turns salmon flesh pink and is believed to give them their incredible athletic ability to swim upstream and leap tall waterfalls to return to their spawning grounds. Astaxanthin is a fat-soluble carotenoid, which means it's a very high-powered, high-density antioxidant that's, in fact, hundreds of times more potent than vitamin C, gram per gram. And because it's fat-soluble, you want to take it with healthy oils, such as fish oils or nuts or seeds or other oils that you're getting in your diet. The oils will help transport astaxanthin to where it's needed in your body's cells. Try it yourself. Get it now at store.talknetwork.com.
All right, you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. We're talking to James Kelley, and you're listening on talknetwork.com, which is, of course, listener-supported. So if you'd like to keep this show going as well as the other excellent shows on the network, be sure to check out talknetwork.com, but go through j.talknetwork.com and you'll find a plethora of supplements, organic products, everything from organic foods, survival products, anything you need like that, especially as we get close to the holiday season. So think about that in terms of what you want to get your young'uns for Christmas or what you want to get your spouse. There's everything there, over 500 products for your needs. We're talking to James Kelley. James has the blog romeosign.wordpress.com. And there you'll find a lot of his scholarly treatments of everything from philosophy to esoterica to even a little bit of film analysis I think James has done in the past. So listeners of this show will find his work very tasteful to their palate. James, you were talking about the filming work of Hubbard, who was this prolific cult leader, writer. Tell us about finish up your comments there.
Sure. What he would do, what he actually got produced when he made his films were training films. He had a big, huge barn with a movie set inside of it that he had constructed. This was done at a time when Hubbard was in hiding, so he didn't want anyone who was working on the film to know where he was. He would come in a car at 7 a.m., work for 16 hours straight, and then leave the site, which was in the desert in California when the filming was done. And what they filmed were just simply training films, but one of them had to do with the FBI, an FBI installation getting bombed. And because at the time...
now, they were training films for what now?
For auditing.
Oh, okay.
But they also dramatized the conflict between Hubbard and mainstream society, because Hubbard believed, once he got rejected by mainstream society, which didn't take long, especially the governmental powers, he began to believe that there was a cabal of evil interests that were at the heart of all world governments, and that so therefore there was this big conflict which had to happen. And so the movie that he made, one of them, was about bombing an FBI office. And the funny anecdote is...
That's a curious kind of false flag type scenario there.
Oh, sure. The funny thing is that he had just gallons of fake blood, and he is said to have, in a maniacal voice, said, "More blood, more blood." And so you had these FBI officers already had both their arms lopped off and were crawling around on the ground, and he's like, "Pour more blood on them." So a lot of people that looked on, especially some disaffected Scientologists, said, we think Hubbard was just simply doing the whole thing so he could sit there himself and see the film. He didn't really care about the film itself at the end of the day. He just wanted to make people throw blood on people that he could think in his mind, these are FBI agents, enemies of Scientology.
Right. So the initial opposition was from arms of the government, because a lot of people will talk about Scientology as kind of a CIA mind control operation. But even if that's the case, you're saying that there is a level of opposition on the part of the feds, and even, as I understand, infiltration of federal organizations.
Oh, sure. There was a thing called Operation Snow White. This was after Operation Snow White happened after Scientology was getting kicked out of England, and Hubbard was having problems with the IRS in the U.S., which even got worse. So Operation Snow White was Hubbard's policy to create an intelligence service, which was called the Guardian's Office, eventually GO, inside of Scientology, to infiltrate and get information about what these FBI and CIA were saying about Scientology. So the whole idea was get in these agencies, get in their files, remove anything that has the word Scientology in it. And then that way we can examine those documents and see what they're saying about us, so we can isolate the cabal of evil interests and then focus on them, so that we can turn society toward us by eliminating the opposition. So that was the stated goal. And you know what? They were somewhat successful.
They were somewhat successful, right?
Because there was in Washington, D.C., many government offices, Pentagon offices and other offices were infiltrated. Over 30,000 documents, I believe, were found when the FBI raided Scientology offices in the United States that had been taken.
Right. Now, how was it successful, though, in terms of infiltrating Hollywood? Because even though you said he befriended Cecil B. DeMille's son, that's probably not enough. So if he's just shooting these kind of training videos for his own operation, how is it that it was successful in getting its tentacles into, A-list actors?
Well, because true to its sort of Gnostic structure, Scientology had a completely different approach to celebrities in Hollywood. It always had a presence in L.A. from the very beginning of 1950, when Dianetics was written. He had an office in the L.A. area, and it never left there. There was a different section of Scientology called the Celebrity Center, and the Celebrity Center catered to film stars and said, okay, John Travolta, well, come with me and we're going to hang out all day and flatter you. We're going to give you your own little bungalow with all your favorite snacks, and we're going to do anything that you want to do. We're going to give you kind of the greased path.
Now, was Travolta one of the first A-list or rising A-listers at the time? I think he had just done Saturday Night Fever around that time, so he was still kind of making his name, right?
Sure, and then also the jazz fusion musician Chick Corea.
Oh, yeah.
Also, to this day, Chick Corea says, without Scientology, I wouldn't have been anything. I would have never had any success whatsoever, in his mind.
Right. Now, before we continue on that Hollywood notion, you mentioned a term, Gnostic. Now, probably some of the listeners to this may not be familiar with what that means. Could you tell us what Gnostic means and how Gnosticism would relate to Scientology?
Well, in most world religions we know now, all the information is available to everyone. Jesus died on the cross for your sins, or Muhammad did this, and you have to pray to Allah and you'll be saved. Mm-hmm. Well, but with Gnosticism, which originally arose in the first centuries of this era as an opposition to Christianity and the Roman Empire, Gnosticism says no, there are divisions in humanity between those who get to know the secrets and those who just have kind of the lower forms of knowledge which pertain to matter and things that are away from the source. So in that sense, the Celebrity Center is Gnostic because it says, well, these are people who have more pull in society, so we're going to give them a different track to go down. And if I'm just a guy who I can't go to the Celebrity Center because I'm not a celebrity, a lowly, regular person. So I have to pay, up to $400,000 to get to the higher OT levels in Scientology. Mm-hmm. But a celebrity, oftentimes, yes, they'll be charged, but they're fated, and they are treated completely differently, like it's a party,
There's a director, Richard Stanley. He directed the sort of B film Hardware from 1990, which is a interesting but not top grade sort of post-apocalypse film. And Stanley has a famous quote where he says that Hollywood itself is really an extension of Gnosticism. Would you agree with that?
Sure. I mean, and we have to be specific. I mean, but yeah, in the sense that Gnosticism, let's just do the comparison with Christianity, generally conceived. Christianity would say, you were created and there is a God outside of you that reveals the truth to you. You have to be united to him. But Gnosticism would be more like, well, the truth is inside you. You are a spark of divinity. You're a piece of divinity that got broken off inexplicably, and then you have to find and tune yourself into what you already have. So know thyself, and you can become a God yourself by, in a sense, looking out around you, seeing nature and seeing the processes of nature, and inferring from that, oh, well, that must be how I created the universe in the first place. And this is right down the middle of the alley for what Scientology says about the creation of the world.
And it makes sense for Hollywood, too, in the sense of Hollywood is really about erecting a synthetic reality out of the minds of writers, directors, and producers.
Sure, and it's very pragmatic. What are the emotional buttons I have to push to get people to come in the door and pay the ticket price?
So they've gotten Travolta in, and they've gotten some money coming in. They're gaining prominence, and as I understand, they kind of had a lull period prior to that, where it was kind of, as you mentioned, with problems with the IRS. They were kind of losing funding, and they didn't know if this would last, if it would go under. What brought them out of that sort of low period into a period of power where they were actually $100 million, billion organization?
Yes, because what they did was ultimately Hubbard realized that he had to spend his time controlling every aspect of the organization and focusing on how much money is brought in from every possible avenue. He would target, people of means, and he would say, okay, well, if we get this many people of means, we can continue to siphon money off of their life savings, and they probably have other well-to-do friends too and family members, and we can say, well, you really need to go through this next level of auditing. We need $15,000. Don't you have an aunt or an uncle who would give you money in case of an emergency? So he found a way to sort of not try to conquer the entire world person by person, but to selectively say, well, here are wealthy people who have the psychological components of being able to be manipulated. Interesting.
So how did they then, how did they get to Cruise and Kidman? And, well, they didn't get to, actually, as the documentary points out, they did kind of blackmail Nicole Kidman for a while. And that seems to be involved somewhat in the marital issues between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. So how do they transition though into being so Hollywood, if you understand what I'm asking?
Because in my mind, basically the question seems to me to be this: what is the appeal for Hollywood people, and maybe people in general, to Scientology? Because it says this is scientific, but it's not.
Hold that thought, because we're going to have a brief break here.
Sure.
And you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood with Jay Dyer, your host, and we're speaking to James Kelley about Hubbard, Scientology, and Hollywood, and how this fits into some recent films that have portrayed this notion. And we're going to take a brief break and come back.
Welcome to the Health Minute with the Health Ranger. One of the ways the system controls you and keeps you down is by literally poisoning your brain with toxic heavy metals like lead. Believe it or not, a lot of the supplements and vitamins that are sold out there are actually made by pharmaceutical companies using cheap ingredients that are contaminated with lead. And lead decreases your IQ. The more you eat, the more dumbed down you become, and that's what the system wants. But if you want to explore your maximum potential as a creative, divine, unique individual, you need to keep your mind free of toxic heavy metals like lead. And that's my specialty. I run a lab where we test all the supplements and superfoods that we offer for all the heavy metals, including lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. And that's why everything that we offer at the Talk Network store is laboratory validated for cleanliness and purity. Protect your brain by feeding it right at store.talknetwork.com.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood with Jay Dyer. I'm talking to James Kelley, who's the author of Anonymizing Divinity, and we're discussing Hubbard, Hollywood, and that whole nexus with Scientology. So finish what you were saying about how they got to the point of really reeling in A-listers and becoming such a Hollywood-style organization. What's that appeal there?
Well, the appeal to me is this. Scientology, like a lot of New Age type movements, says this splits the difference between science and spirituality. Science is too limited to the material world and doesn't give you ultimate answers. Eastern religion and mysticism doesn't give you anything tangible. It doesn't say you're going to make more money or anything like that necessarily.
Right.
So what Scientology did is say you're going to know the truth empirically about everything, and you're also going to have greater success, greater control over matter, energy, space, time. So it sort of offered everything. And there didn't seem to be any drawbacks to it. And plus, keep in mind, Hollywood types have always been, because what they do oftentimes is banal and insipid. I mean, not always, but I mean, it's making films is certainly not, changing the world necessarily. There's a sense that perhaps what I'm doing is not fulfilling, even though a lot of people are paying attention to it. So that's why L.A. and Hollywood, one of the reasons why they've always been susceptible to every new religious movement, every new spiritual claim, because they're desperate, although I don't want to say they're desperate, but I think they're eager to fill up that gaping void with meaning.
Yes.
And Scientology offers more than any of it. Now, as far as
just like what happens with Joaquin Phoenix's character in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is about I was thinking about the motorcycle, the point-to-point game. It's actually true. Hubbard would do that. He would go out to the desert and he would say, I see a tree way out there, so I'm going to ride my motorcycle as fast as I can. And there may be a little cactus in the way or a bush or something or a tumbleweed, but I'm just going to drive on through it. Devil may care, and go straight on to that point. And in the movie, it's used to say, oh, okay, they're playing this cool game, this manly kind of game, but Freddie Quell just keeps on driving because he's learned all he can from Dodd and from the cause. He's learned that he has to face up to what's going on inside of him. He can't take a journey away from his problems across the world in a war to avoid the fact that maybe Doris will never come back to him.
Right.
So so it kind of makes you think, is this how people get involved in Scientology? Does it mean something to them in their inner life, and it's not always exactly what is being done to them or the intentions of the Scientologists who are putting them through this process. So it's an interesting thing.
Well, another element that we should talk about at this point is the tie-in to Aleister Crowley, the British Satanist / ritual magician who would have a connection in a way to Hubbard. So can you tell us some about that and what your research turned up in that regard and how it actually might tie into the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Jack Parsons?
Yes, Hubbard met Jack Parsons, Pasadena, California, lived with him at his so-called parsonage, and this was after World War II when Hubbard came back from his Navy experience, and Hubbard himself admitted it was not a very glorious record in the Navy. And after that, though, he would wear his naval uniform everywhere. He wore it to Jack Parsons' house, and Jack Parsons was the head of the OTO, which was the Crowley Magic Society, basically, in the United States and around the world. But he met this Crowley magician person, Jack Parsons, who also helped to design, I think, jellied rocket fuel, the kind of rocket fuel that got the Apollo mission and all the other, spaceships out of the atmosphere. So he actually, was a legitimate engineer, scientific engineer. Mm-hmm. But they would do these satanic, I don't want to say satanic, every OTO person in the world is going to hate me if I say that. I will just say thelemic is the term for the magic that comes from Crowley's teaching. So I'll just say these thelemic rituals were done with Hubbard there. Hubbard chose the music. He's like, oh, let's play Shostakovich while we do this. And what Parsons and Hubbard did was they were attempting to bring a woman, a whore of Babylon, to be Parsons' sort of right-hand woman, if you will. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, some would say because Hubbard wanted to leave with Parsons' girlfriend, Sarah Northrop, which he did, and Hubbard married her.
Now, this gets into Marjorie Cameron, right?
Yes, Marjorie Cameron is the one who showed up.
Right.
She was so Hubbard is, and Parsons even says in his writings, Hubbard made up some of the liturgical chanting that they did. And Parsons said Hubbard has a natural ability to just understand the metaphysical import of any notion. If I talk about, I'm wanting to do this, Hubbard, and he would just know he seemed to know exactly what I wanted and how to put that into ritual language and just start rapping on it, start doing it. So it makes you wonder what kind of forces Hubbard was in contact with. He certainly was able to pinpoint what people wanted and to just give it to them.
The liturgy of Xenu, the divine liturgy of Holy Saint Xenu.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and don't let anyone fool you. Xenu is not an allegory. All this interplanetary confederation, all this stuff, Hubbard said this is fact and it's real, and it's not an allegory at all. It would be... Scientology would say that you were basically a heretic if you said it's anything but literal truth.
Right. Now, this is the Babylon working, correct? Like where they were out in the desert trying to create an incubus or succubus, and they're trying to bring about the coming of the Antichrist as they would read the book of Revelations. Now, I'm curious what you think about this in terms of there's this clear apocalypticism that we find in the groups that Crowley would be involved with, where there is this rereading of, say, the book of Revelations. Now, do you see an apocalyptic kind of immanentization that's in Scientology as well? Did Hubbard maybe take some of those ideas with his science fiction space opera theology?
Absolutely. People who had dedicated their lives and were starting to flag in their interest, he would say, we've got a planet to clear. You can't do you're saying that you need more than 2 hours of sleep per night. Don't you understand this is a cosmic struggle? He would certainly use that. And remember, if you wanted to be in the inner circle, the C organization of Scientology, you had to sign a 1 billion-year contract. In other words, as you go through all of your reincarnated lifetimes, you're not just signing for this lifetime. As you become reincarnated, you have to get up and go to the flagship and start working more.
Yeah, so it becomes like a labor cult.
Oh yes, and don't be fooled. Hubbard basically believed, he said, look, the lowest form of existence is apathy. Slightly above that is communism. Above that is fascism. Above that is democracy. But even further above that is a kind of utopianism where every individual pursues his own interest, interlaced with the self-interest of everyone else. And there's no conflict because everyone is perfectly cognizant of the fact that they are all Thetans and it's all a game that they're all playing together.
Now, elaborate a little bit more on that game notion, because you mentioned that when we've spoken before. What do you mean there?
Sure. Let me give you a quotation here from a Scientology lecture, the Philadelphia doctorate course.
Okay.
Hubbard says, Thetans have agreed to such a thing as pain, and in order to be aware, agreed that they were something that couldn't be aware. Another quotation from the same lecture series says, a Thetan has less and less energy in direct relation to its inability to hold in view a facsimile. And a facsimile would be like a Hollywood image or a filmic image or anything you can picture as a thought. So for Hubbard, everything began at the level of these immobile spiritual beings who had nothing to do. And so in order to have something to do that was meaningful, that communicated amongst themselves, they would agree upon a game, something that moved, something that developed, something that had motion. And so the problem is that in order to agree on a game, you have to forget that you don't need the game. You have to, in order for the game to have a reality of any depth, you would have to have some level of your Thetan mind say, okay, I'm going to forget that I originated the game just a little bit so I can play the game. And what happens, according to Hubbard, is that the Thetans actually end up descending further and further down the scale, if you will, so that they actually do literally forget that they created the game. And that's where we come from. We're Thetans who forgot that we made up the game.
So it really is a man discovering his own kind of self-inner deity, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Which would be the Gnostic element.
Yeah, and for Hubbard, we mentioned R6, this Hollywood film which imprisons you. And it's the man lying down below the cross, above Christ on the cross, who's dying and failing to survive throughout all eternity. I think I may have found, I was looking before the interview started, Tintoretto's Crucifixion, a 16th century painting, which was probably Hubbard had to have seen. It's very culturally prominent. It shows the cross, and then it shows the thief on his left hand laid down on a cross on the ground, as if he's being hammered into the cross or being crucified. And the thief to the left, to Christ's left, appears to be trying to get up like a sick man trying to get up out of his bed unsuccessfully.
Wow.
And right next to this other person laying down on the cross is a trench. It looks almost like a World War I trench with people sitting down inside of it beneath the cross, and it looks kind of stormy and wet, and it looks as if, you know...
All right, well, hold that thought, James. We're going to take a brief break here and come back, and we're talking with James Kelley about Scientology.
David Presidents are selected, not elected. If all of this sounds intriguing, come join us on Truth is Stranger Than Lies on TalkNetwork.com.
Your reality is not what you think.
Mondays at 4 p.m. Eastern here on TalkNetwork.com.
I'm going to give you a little insight of what not to say to a pregnant person. You look so big. That's just not a compliment. That's not good. It's not positive. You feel like crap already. You know what you can say? Say, oh my God, you look so gorgeous. Okay, so we know that you just mean sweaty and bloated, but be kind. Be kind. Just say, oh my God, you look great.
Mother Love Rocks, Sundays, 4 p.m. Eastern on
IDP Consulting Group is a full-service precious metals brokerage firm that specializes in pure bullion for physical, delivery, and commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. Precious metals have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for wealth protection and an excellent way to hedge against risky markets in uncertain times. You can call 855-860-6800 for a no-obligation consultation, and the professionals at IDP Consulting Group can also assist with converting IRA accounts into a precious metals IRA for safekeeping and flexibility. A transfer or rollover is a penalty-free transaction and can afford tax-deferred capital gains with low annual fees. IDP can also assist clients with secure segregated and non-segregated depository accounts with precious metals in a fully bonded and secured facility for convenience and reliable storage. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 or visit idpconsultinggroup.com.
Hello there. It's now time for the network disclaimer. The views and opinions of blah, 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 blah do not necessarily reflect blah, 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 talknetwork.com and so on and so forth. Bloody regulations anyway. Now then, let's get on with it, shall we?
What you're missing on Our World with Gary Franchi.
You know, as I look around our world, I see wars, rumors of wars, terror, fear, instability, economic recklessness, political corruption, scandals, frauds, manipulation by the mass media, human safety traded for corporate profits, while freedom is traded for security. Our world is on the brink of disaster, brink of collapse, brink of hope, brink of change. No, our world is on the brink of the greatest shift in human consciousness the planet has ever seen, and you have a front row seat.
Our World with Gary Franchi, 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays on Talk Network.
This is TalkNetwork.com.
For Talk Network News, I'm Don Naylor. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says the U.S. hopes Canada will continue to be a part of the anti-Islamic State group coalition, despite what Trudeau said on the campaign trail about withdrawing Canada warplanes from the fight.
They've made an important contribution thus far, and we're obviously deeply appreciative of them lending their talent and skill and expertise to that effort. And we hope that we can continue to count on their ongoing support for this very important mission.
Vice President Joe Biden says he won't be a candidate in the coming campaign, but if Democrats are smart, they'll embrace the legacy that he and President Obama have built.
Democrats should not only defend this record and protect this record, they should run on the record.
House Speaker John Boehner says he expects Paul Ryan will get the necessary backing to become Speaker.
He works hard, he's very bright, and he has good relationships, I think, with all the wings of the party. So that's why I think he'll be doing fine.
British Prime Minister David Cameron confirms that a British company has reached an agreement with a Chinese corporation to build a nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point in West England.
And I'm pleased to announce today that we're signing an historic deal to build the Hinkley nuclear power station, providing reliable, affordable energy for nearly 6 million homes and creating more than 25,000 jobs, all the while working together to build a low-carbon future.
And NYPD Commissioner William Bratton says a New York City police officer died after being shot in the head while pursuing a suspect.
I regret to inform you that New York City police officer Randolph Holder, 33 years of age, badge number 13340, a 5-year veteran of the New York City Police Department, was killed in the line of duty, murdered.
For details on these stories and more, go to TalkNetwork.com.
Gold and silver have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for personal wealth and protection. Precious metals are an excellent way to hedge against risky markets and uncertain times, and also provides a low-profile asset for enhanced financial privacy. IDP Consulting Group specializes in pure bullion products for physical delivery and commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. As an asset class, precious metals can never go to zero and have the potential to reward smart investors as global markets increasingly threaten conventional investment strategies. You can call IDP Consulting Group to learn more at 855-860-6800 or visit their website at idpconsultinggroup.com. Payment terms are easy and simple, and IDP promptly and discreetly ships all orders within the continental U.S. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 and put a gold and silver lining in your portfolio today.
To Esoteric Hollywood, I'm your host, Jay Dyer from jaysanalysis.com. Listen, before we continue, I want to tell you to go to talknetwork.com, and you'll see my show there as well as a whole bunch of other excellent programs. And if you go to j.talknetwork.com, you'll see the plethora, the wide range of everything from whole whey protein to holistic health products. We've got everything from music to bedding and mattress that would be, for example, hypoallergenic. There is beverages such as tea, organic detoxifiers, supplements, immunity building products, eye care, everything you could think of that are going to be great for this holiday season. And that is, again, at j.talknetwork.com. So we're talking with James Kelley, who's the author of Anonymizing Divinity, which you can get through Amazon.com. His blog is romeosyne.wordpress.com, and that is ROMEOSYNE. So if you just type in Romeo Sign and James Kelley, that is Kelley, excuse me, you'll get his work. So James, you were telling us about something you wanted to finish up on. Go ahead.
Sure. I was talking about the so-called R6 implant, which sort of gives Hubbard's notion of the crucifixion. And I was speculating that maybe he had seen Tintoretto's crucifixion from the 16th century, where it, interestingly enough, with Hubbard being a veteran and being so interested in Cecil B. DeMille-style biblical motion pictures, and then also having this obsession with the war. You know, he's a war veteran. He wears his Navy, uniform everywhere. So with Hubbard, I think if it's possible that he looked at this Tintoretto painting and saw what appeared to be biblical figures like trench warfare victims, then it would explain this quotation. Let me quote briefly from his assist lecture. This is about R6. Hubbard says, "There are certain things which make people ill, and that is when they get into certain zones and areas or positions which approximate the R6 position, such as a body lying in the rain with a rat below the cross, guaranteed to give people colds and so forth, so they have colds from rain. Yet they take baths and get wet and don't get colds. When they get cold, it re-stimulates," and then he goes on to talk about how perhaps in these bodily positions of people in sick beds and things which look like these Tintoretto figures, they're looking up, they're focusing on the engram in their minds which says, you can't survive, you have to get sick, it's time for you to get sick. So that kind of gives you an idea of Hubbard's sort of mythology, his religious mythology that he puts forth, and how it relates to, the DeMille-style Ten Commandments narrative, where you have this big, huge, dramatic outdoor scene, with the whole cosmos coming into play.
Right,
well, the Tintoretto kind of perhaps is an indirect or direct inspiration for that.
That's interesting. So, yeah, we do see the utilization of Christian imagery then, even in Scientology and Hubbard's group. They even use the cross, on the top of their buildings. So it's interesting to see maybe the reasonings or the speculations as to how he decided that would be useful. And I would guess that he understood that he wanted to appeal to a Western audience primarily that would be familiar with those generic Christian ideas. Is that right?
Sure, and just think what group comprises most. What religious group has the most people going out of it and into Scientology? It's Roman Catholicism.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, there's more Catholics than Protestants or Orthodox or anybody that are going into.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know the reason why, but I do know that many of the, this is a generalization from my own experience, but many of the friends I have who are Catholic priests or educators or what have you, a lot of them, when you talk about psychology and psychiatry, they seem to be wanting to dovetail that in with their theology as closely as possible. And I don't know if Hubbard realized that, hey, we have people here who are in a large religious group who want answers to mindscape type questions about the workings of the mind, and they are amenable to it. They've been primed to say, well, psychiatrists can tell us a lot about that. So that's just one idea, but it certainly needs further scrutiny.
It probably could relate as well to the sort of loss of adherence amongst Western Roman Catholic populations. I know that from the statistics that I've researched quite a bit over the years, there's been a drastic decline in entrances into convents, into religious life, as well as Catholic schools. And then, of course, you have the pedophilia scandal. And a lot of this, I think, arises out of what happens at Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council. So I think maybe the shaking of the foundations of Roman Catholicism is what could open a lot of that large section of the religious population up to these new, alternative approaches.
Plus, yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of Roman Catholicism in Hollywood, the whole production code, which was all started because of this league, the Roman Catholics Decency League. I can't remember the actual name of it. But there has long been this idea that what Hollywood's really trying to do has to accommodate itself to some kind of vaguely Catholic idea. In other words, it doesn't have to be Catholic, but it has to make them happy so that they don't decide to make their, 600, 700 billion possible viewers, say, hey, the Bishop of New York said don't see this film, which is what they threatened to do back in I guess it was the 30s and 40s.
They would, yeah, and Pius XI actually wrote encyclicals that dealt with Hollywood. There's an entire encyclical that deals with mass media back in the 20s or 30s and 40s, right when Hollywood was really coming into its own, and they would talk about the power of film to create alternative mythology, an alternative paradigm for people to follow. And so there's a lot of warnings coming out of the Holy Office back in those days.
And keep in mind, Hubbard, at least my interpretation of what he took the cross to be, because remember, his cross looks like a Celtic cross.
Yeah, it does, right.
It has a little circle around it. But and my interpretation is that, Hubbard was interested in the Greek letter theta, meaning light. He got that from thelema. It's the first letter of thelema.
That's a great point, yeah.
Yeah, that's the vertical line. But then the horizontal line, if you took that vertical line out in the circle, it would be the Greek letter phi, and this is actually in Science of Survival by Hubbard. He says phi is the Greek letter we will take to represent the material universe.
Wow.
So
okay.
He may have seen that symbol and said, "Oh, well, here you go. Here's your traditionalist Western cross." But to him, it meant the intersection of the life force, the theta, taking control of matter, energy, space, time, and guiding it toward his utopian purposes.
Also reminiscent of the Gnostic cross, which is the circle with the 4 divisions with the lines. All right, so let's move on to the topic of another film, very different from The Master, which has this similarity, this reference to Scientology, and this is the film Schizopolis. So this is a 1996 film directed by Steven Soderbergh, and it's a mystery, comedy, sci-fi, fantasy, well, it's not really sci-fi, fantasy, satire, horror kind of thing. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but tell us your initial thoughts on this film and what jumped out to you.
Well, to me, Schizopolis, the first thing you see after this initial little skit is that you see a commercial, which is it shows a kind of a magma flying through the air on this commercial, which is presented in the film Schizopolis. And it says eventualism. You see a book coming out of the lava, and it's obviously a mock of the Dianetics.
Dianetics, right.
Which has the exploding volcano, which is the volcanoes that Xenu, used to run R6 on people. And
that's ironic too, because according to what Scientology puts out to the public, the Xenu mythology is not part of the official story, supposedly. Yet on the cover of Dianetics, there's always been this big volcano. I remember back to the 80s, when I was a kid, you would see Dianetics commercials come on TV, and it would be all this volcano stuff everywhere.
Yeah, and the thing is that if you go by Hubbard's writings and many varied sources, there isn't any way to say Xenu is not literally true. But you will have people that say, I interpret it as an allegory. So, what can you do with that? You have a contradiction there. That's the most you can say. But with Schizopolis, you have the eventualism. So it's a fictional movement here, and it's T. Azimuth Schwitters is their L. Ron Hubbard in this film. And it's interesting to compare it with The Master, because in this one, to me, Schizopolis, it tells the story of Fletcher Munson, who is kind of an office space type, cog in a wheel office worker, but he works for the organization. He works for Schwitter's the Hubbard character's religious group. And basically what he does is he eventually, he does a lot of things, doesn't he? But
yeah, it's wild. It's very abstract, very postmodern.
It's really hard to summarize what really happens, but the main point of it, I think, is a love triangle between Fletcher Munson, his wife, who's only known as Mrs. Munson, and then another doppelganger-type weird character who's a doctor, who's kind of a more successful conservative version of Fletcher Munson. And so they're, at one point when he makes the shift from one character to the other, Fletcher Munson, he says, "Oh my gosh, I'm having an affair with my own wife."
Right, I had a note for that.
It reminded me of those old noir movies like DOA, where he's like, "I've come to he walks into the police station and says, "I've come to report a murder, mine." You know, one of those strange, mind-bending type. How could that possibly be? Type tabloid lines. But for Fletcher Munson, I think the whole point of the film is every situation has a different language game that's going on, a different type of language.
Yes, that's exactly what I had in my notes as well, the linguistic play, right.
And running through the whole thing is another alter ego of Fletcher Munson, which is Elmo Oxygen, who Elmo Oxygen basically just runs around town trying to go inside women's houses and leave his mark, as it says on the side of his exterminator.
All right, hold that thought for a second. I'll be right back with Esoteric Hollywood.
Captain Obvious takes listener questions today. Welcome, caller. What's your question?
I've been eating so much chlorella that my poop has turned green. What should I do?
It's simple. Drink beet juice to add red to your diet, and you can produce Christmas colors.
Wow, I never knew that.
Next caller, you're up with Captain Obvious.
Hello, Captain Obvious. I haven't been able to get the energy to vote since about 1996.
Oh, you have electile dysfunction.
Well, I guess so. I keep trying to pull the lever, but nothing happens.
Well, you've probably got hanging Chad's disorder. Next time, vote with your feet.
Hello, I'm a gender-confused university student, and I don't know if I should use the women's restroom or the men's restroom.
That's easy. Reach down your pants and tell me what's there.
Shame?
Ah, yes, you're suffering from an overdose of political correctness. Your prescription is to listen to TalkNetwork.com.
I'm your host, Jay Dyer, and you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. We're speaking with James Kelley.
Truck. So he's basically just trying to get into everyone's house in town, every woman, basically have sex with them, take a picture of his own genitals with their own camera, so that later they will go develop the film and they'll have this obscene photo, middle of it. And keep in mind also at the end of the film, when Elmo Oxygen assassinates the L. Ron Hubbard type character, T. Azimuth Schwitter's, keep in mind, I keep stumbling over that name, and I think that was purposeful. It's a tongue twister. That's what I came up with. I was sitting around saying, why T. Azimuth Schwitter's? And I was like, well, the one thing I can say is I can't say it 5 times in a row, so that just may be the joke on us. But nonetheless, when Elmo assassinates or attempts to assassinate Schwitter's, the police have him and they're interrogating him, and they're like, why'd you do this? What's going on? He answers in his own strange way with these weird little smell sign and beef diaper and all these strange little phrases that don't mean anything. But then he finally just, opens up his fly and shows them the real meaning of it all. And at that point, they all go, oh my gosh. And people have to realize that this is probably a reference to the film Kiss Me Deadly by Robert Aldrich, where everyone's looking for the great Whatsit. And it's actually atomic energy. And it's in this little bitty box, and they open it up and everyone always goes, oh my gosh, what is that? The light shines from the box, And then later Pulp Fiction sort of...
Yeah, I was about to say Pulp Fiction, right?
Yeah, it referred also back to the Great Whatsit from Kiss Me Deadly. So in Schizopolis, the Great Whatsit is the nether member of Elmo
Oxygen.
And to me, Elmo Oxygen, like, he represents just the lowest id-oriented type.
Baser desires, right?
Yeah, and it's just this dramatization of the basest desires of survival known to man. And that relates to Scientology, right? Because L. Ron Hubbard said, I boiled down the wisdom of all ages down to one word. It took me a long time. What is that word? Survive. You know, so there is this kind of going on in Schizopolis too.
All right, so go ahead and finish that thought, James. You were talking about Schizopolis, and fill out what you were saying with what you saw it as sort of an alter ego of the main character. I took it as well to be kind of it's almost as if this kind of an ideology functions well in postmodern America because of the fact that we live in kind of a schizophrenic culture. And the mindless, mundane, day-to-day job that a cog in the wheel has versus the pragmatic, get-to-the-top, monopolistic capitalism that we live in, this itself kind of produces this split in the psyche, this dual concept of who we as humans are and what this country is about. And that's why it's prime breeding ground for something like a cult, like eventualism, which is the stand-in for Dianetics.
Sure, and the whole idea of, I agree with you wholeheartedly, the whole idea of eventualism is eventually you'll get to the truth, right? Well, the joke is in Scientology, you just keep going through higher sea level.
And Hubbard would just keep tacking those on.
Oh, sure, and if you listen to a lot of Hubbard's lectures, I've listened to dozens of them, and what I've seen as a running theme that he wanted to do in his lectures is to say, look, when you think you've cleared someone from an engram and they just walk out the door happy, it's like you have to know that there are really more thetans in their body because of all these reasons. So there's always a reason to bring them back in for more auditing, and that's what a lot of the lectures were about. Now with Schizopolis, to me, at least one thought I had is that, okay, you have all these characters. You have Fletcher Munson, and his whole trajectory of his life is that he's trying to write the script for the L. Ron Hubbard type character, T. Azimuth Schwitters, and in order to get the better job, the better office, and all of this. Well, it says at the end of the movie that he narrates that he actually ends up working for a probably AT&T, some kind of telecommunications company, and writing copy for them, and gets a lot more money. But his wife, Mrs. Munson, leaves him for someone who's more handsome, richer, and who communicates better. And then finally he moves to Alaska at a friend's wedding. He gets drunk and gets lost in a snowdrift, and he's thawed out the next year. So it's all just an absurdist thing that says I got to the top, or my career trajectory ended up with me being a Bigfoot, basically. Like this
woolly mammoth frozen in a block of ice, right?
Yeah, and I was successfully unfrozen, and it also may relate to the whole idea in Scientology of being frozen in a glycol alcohol solution in a box.
Yes, this is what's the plot of Vanilla Sky.
Yeah, yes, absolutely, and Vanilla Sky is another variant of that. But then again, also, what happens? So if you're starting with Elmo Oxygen, he's like an oxygen molecule. He's one of the lowest forms of life, right? But he's also one of the most active and successful at surviving. So what's he going to do? He's going to rise up from his lowly role as a supporting actor in the Schizopolis film, and he's going to have his own action series. Part of the film, these two would-be amateur producers come up to the character in the movie, Elmo Oxygen, and say, hey, this Soderbergh guy is not doing anything for you, why don't you come with us? So he gives him his own action series. But ultimately, what can he do in his action series? He can't incorporate any social or higher goals, so he ends up just ripping tags off of mattresses, and then eventually the only thing he can do is assassinate the person who thinks they are at the top of this survival chain, which is T. Azimuth Schwitters himself. And then that's when he ends up saying, what's the meaning of it all? Well, let me unzip my fly and I'll show you. And so what is the horror of the great Watsit? Well, it's the fact that no matter how high you go up the chain, no matter how successful, no matter how well you seem to integrate these societal idealistic goals, it's all just a survival, pull and push mechanism.
Yeah, the word games aspect of it ties back into that game aspect of Scientology that you were mentioning with the Thetans. And it also made me think of Wittgenstein and deconstructionism and the fact that
what's going on in these different social settings is a lot of wordplay and word games. So, for example, when Fletcher and his wife are talking, he walks in and it's generic greeting. She says, generic greeting returned. Fletcher says, imminent sustenance. Wife says, overly dramatic statement regarding upcoming meal. Fletcher says, oh, false reaction indicating hunger and excitement.
And then the wife makes the excuse to go have the affair with the doppelganger of her husband, not knowing that's what it is. Right. And she says something like, typical movie and boring conversation with a girlfriend or something to that effect. So it's like you think this is just, if you boil down what the wife does when they come back from having the affair, I mean, you can just boil it down no matter what the words are, this is the meaning of it. And keep in mind, Hubbard always said language, there is no language, what he said are basically abstractions from material entities in space and time. He thought matter, energy, space, time was more fundamental than language.
Well, that sounds kind of like Aristotle.
It does, and interestingly enough, Hubbard was influenced by Count Alfred Korzybski, who we name-checked in our last talk that we had. And Korzybski, thought of himself as an anti-Aristotelian, but he had a really reductive, weird interpretation of Aristotle. So your point is way more germane. It is more Aristotelian.
Yeah. Also, the title of the film itself, Schizopolis, right? Polis, if we think of back to the Greeks or even Aristotle's work on the polis, it's the idea of a schizophrenic civil order. That's what the Greek polis means. Would you agree?
Yes. Oh, yes, and it's even more so to me the Stoics with their whole the term cosmopolis,
which is it, right? Yeah.
From the Stoics, and the whole idea of Stoicism, well, at least if you boil it down to kind of a pop version of it, is I'm going to make my own decisions, and they're going to fully. It's going to be sort of inwardly turned, but I'm not going to pay attention to the interbulated. That's a Hubbard term there, but to the interbulated nature of the matter outside of me. And I'm going to somehow be in touch with this kind of material fire. Well, in Schizopolis, remember, one of the commentators is talking about what's wrong with T. Azimuth Schwitters, and he says, well, he has absolutely no concern for societal goals, and he's completely focused on himself. That is true, but he does it in a way that makes him very successful in this society, and he certainly gives people jobs, and he's perfectly integrated into these seemingly higher levels of organization. But at core, it's just as empty as Elmo Oxygen, if not more.
Interesting.
In my opinion.
Right. No, I did had similar thoughts. It's as if, well, think about the discussion of the news, right? Do you remember the news scene where there's this news announcement that the guy comes on and says, we want to, deny the false reports that racehorses urinate more often than any other breed of horse of the same size and stature.
Yeah, it's a total send-up of social causes because we're taking up for animals, our animal ancestors.
Exactly.
And it's saying that this language joke, like, he has to go like a Russian racehorse or whatever, or a racehorse on race day, whatever the it's starting with that little metaphor, that little colloquialism, and saying, what if we blew this up to world proportions or regional proportions and said this is a social issue? So to me, it's kind of like it's a commentary on how social issues and taking up for
Hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with James Kelley.
Gold and silver have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for personal wealth and protection. Precious metals are an excellent way to hedge against risky markets in uncertain times and also provide a low-profile asset for enhanced financial privacy. IDP Consulting Group specializes in pure bullion products for physical delivery or commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. As an asset class, precious metals can never go to zero and have the potential to reward smart investors as global markets increasingly threaten conventional investment strategies. You can call IDP Consulting Group to learn more at 855-860-6800 or visit their website at www.idpconsultinggroup.com. Payment terms are easy and simple, and IDP promptly and discreetly ships all orders within the continental U.S. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 and put a gold and silver lining in your portfolio today.
Hi, this is the Health Ranger here with the Health Minute brought to you by store.talknetwork.com. The question today is, what is astaxanthin? Well, astaxanthin is an amazing nutritional supplement made by single-celled microorganisms. It is what turns salmon flesh pink and is believed to give them their incredible athletic ability to swim upstream and leap tall waterfalls to return to their spawning grounds. Astaxanthin is a fat-soluble carotenoid, which means it's a very high-powered, high-density antioxidant that's, in fact, hundreds of times more potent than vitamin C, gram per gram. And because it's fat-soluble, you want to take it with healthy oils, such as fish oils or nuts or seeds or other oils that you're getting in your diet. The oils will help transport astaxanthin to where it's needed in your body's cells. Try it yourself. Get it now at store.talknetwork.com.
You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. You're listening on talknetwork.com. James, you were just talking about this curious scene where there's a hilarious news broadcast in the film Schizopolis that we've been discussing, ultimately related back to Scientology and Hubbard and Hollywood, but finish your thought on that.
Sure, it's as if, the issue of taking up for racehorses and the jokes that are said about them, it's kind of an indirect critique of political correctness and any kind of social cause whatsoever. And the other one that I thought was funny was how the Japanese buy Rhode Island and encase it in this big shopping mall. I just thought that was great. Because it's such a small state, right? You just make it a big, huge...
Make it into a huge mall, which is really kind of what America is, even according to George Carlin.
Absolutely. So I did respond rather in a big way to the cultural critique there in that film.
Yeah, I thought it was funny too, the feigned honesty of mid-America or 50s, 60s America. It's very much a satire of America itself.
Sure, and as I watched the film a couple times this week, I was thinking, but is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Is there any positive aspect? To me, the scale of values in the film, the only person that has any inkling that it can be above this, this reductionist Elmo oxygen thing is Mrs. Munson. Because if you think about it, she, at times, yes, she's portrayed as being just as shallow and determined as everyone else. But she only goes to the doctor, the doppelganger doctor, because Fletcher is so inwardly turned and focused on this speech. And also, the third section of the movie is from her perspective. And she is seen to be speaking, even though she's gossiping with her female friend, it's genuine. It's not in some kind of coded language weirdness.
Yeah.
And she also, once she leaves the doctor, remember, she says, I used to think that I was like a rag with a stain in it that wouldn't come out, and you were like a piece of rotten fruit on a windowsill, and it was great. And to me, that's the key. That's the pivot point to the whole film for me, because it's saying this isn't just basic language like we use, hello, how are you doing? And it's also not that totally scrambled up, beef diaper nonsense of it's somewhere in between, because it's saying I'm using language to communicate a value to you and to let you know, hey, look, you threw away something that had value. We could have had an actual human interaction here that does transcend just survival, but you threw it away because you're so self-absorbed and pathetic. So to me, when you see Fletcher Munson say, my wife left me for someone with better survival characteristics than me, more money, better looks, that's from his perspective, because I think she's kind of a ray of light that, yes, there can be humanly determined values. I'm not saying I agree with this because I'm a theist and all of that, but I'm just saying from Soderbergh's perspective, I think there is a hope for humanly determined values that don't fall into this, weird cult game and don't fall into this weird consumerist, determined environment.
Another interesting thought that I had about the cult leader himself, when you see him giving his lectures, is that he looks like a guy from the 50s, right? He's got this crew cut, and he's got these horn rim glasses, and he's very direct. And what he does is he does language games himself. So he's actually spitting out all these gobbledygook aphorisms that are just kind of reversed. It's almost like the Sphinx from the character Mystery Men. If you ever saw that goofy comedy with Ben Stiller, there's this new agey cult leader kind of guy who says all these seemingly mysterious phrases, but it's all stuff like, you know, if you want to master your pain must be your master, or something like that, right? Like, which is just meaningless phraseology, but it actually seems to have cast a spell on the public or on the cult member.
Sure, and it's absolutely right. And remember, the interviewed man with the kind of wispy hair that ends up being the one who had the striped socks.
Mm-hmm.
When he's being interviewed and he says, you know, there are people that live their lives like everything they do and everything that's happening is in typed script and being shown to the public. In other words, it's like a film script.
Mm-hmm.
How relevant is all of that to what we're saying?
Exactly.
Well, but he also says, but anyone that tells you that real meaning is garnered from any source except the most mind-bending concentration, then this is the realm of the poseur, da-da-da-da. I'm paraphrasing what he said. But it's interesting, isn't it, that the only thing that's left is this stoic, mind-bending concentration. It's got to happen within your own mind, and it's only Mrs. Munson that's able to say, look, I tried to reach across that chasm and have something real, but no one around me seems to be able to return that. So I have to give you this metaphor, which does sound kind of silly and stupid to us, but if we look below the surface, the whole rag with the stain that can't come out and the rotting piece of fruit, it's actually a very serious poetic image compared to those extremes, those two shores, the Scylla and Charybdis, you know, that's around it.
So if somebody were to ask you, James, what is the meaning of this weird, why is it that every time that the Oxygen character is speaking, he's speaking gibberish? Why is that?
Well, I think it's because it's saying this to me. It's saying, okay, I'm Elmo Oxygen. I'm the lowest id-oriented drive with absolutely no control whatsoever. What kind of language am I going to use? It's going to be one that it sounds very unfamiliar to us, but it's like it's breaking everything down to what if we didn't know our language and we were looking at it from the outside and we would see someone saying smell sign, and smiling as if something were exchanged. It's actually just sounds that people say, like, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
Or what, you know, at least from Soderbergh's perspective, I think it's saying, you know, it's convention. We see what Elmo's really doing. He's plying the woman with wine, and we know what's going to happen.
Right.
And then I think that as he lets other people, even, you know, later on, the Fletcher Munson character speaks, and it's overdubbing Japanese and other foreign languages, and I think, but she keeps her own voice. So I think everyone's always thrown into this weird scale where someone's able to speak with a real voice in various degrees of realness. Other people are getting more artificial, and other people are getting more far away from anything that has a hope of not being determined, I guess.
Right. So relate some of that back to Scientology. How would any of that connect back to what's going on with Hubbard and that group?
It's funny, with Scientology, there seems to be this idea that you have to understand the meaning of each word, it says in the Scientology terms dictionary.
Ah, okay.
So basically what happens is you'll have the little footnotes at the bottom of each page which tell you what different terms mean. And he says if you feel that you don't understand what you're reading in a Scientology text, go back and read it again until you understand it. Now, it sounds like, oh, wow, you know, this is just wanting people to learn. But to me, psychologically, and I'm going to not go past it until I think I understand exactly what it means. In other words, I have no doubts about it. I have no inner dialogue about, do I need to kind of put that off to the side and say I'm not sure that what the full import of that is? In other words, critical thought gets stamped and put off in a file, and then you go to the next bit of information. So I think if it's used like that, and I think that was the intent in my opinion, then you think critical thought is being used, but it's actually just being utilized in a piecemeal manner, and then put in the toolbox again, if you know what I mean.
Well, and that might be related. Hubbard was able to just churn out these vomits of words, like just at an insane pace, as you've commented in the past, right? What it was that he would go into a room with a gallon of coffee and he could churn out all these words?
Absolutely. Unbelievable amounts of copy. and made other pulp writers envious. Like, how does he do this?
And how many books was it you said he's written?
I actually don't know the
well, you said there was volumes. How many? Some insane amount of volumes.
Just only his policy letters, which are just little 1, 2, 3 page things mainly. Just those collected together, 20-something volumes, I think. That's
not counting the sci-fi novels, right?
Oh yes, the sci-fi novels and the short stories would amount to thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of pages, but. He had also many of the books. You have Dianetics. You have what's called Book 2. You have a ton of books. The problem, though, you run into is that when you start reading Dianetics literature or Scientology literature, you end up getting recycled bits. And it's funny, as an outsider reading this stuff, you start to feel like, say Marvel Comics, like, you've got the new, double-length issue, but you realize it's just some kind of regurgitated flashback from something they've sold you before. And you get that with Scientology. So they used all the tricks of the corporate trade to get you to continue to buy stuff. So yes, he did write a lot of books, but a lot of them are rehashings, in my opinion. And some of it's beyond my opinion. It's simply collecting together things under different titles and just making you buy the book again.
Right. Interesting. Well, not a bad marketing strategy.
Oh, it's absolutely perfect.
Schizopolis, of course, on the one last note on this, was not very well received. Well, it was critically received very well. It got a lot of good critical reviews, but did not make money. The box office numbers were $250,000 for the budget and then $10,000 for the box office. So I wonder if it was just because it was such a non-linear narrative that it was just a little too abstract and philosophical for the mass audience.
Sure, and it's kind of, I think it was just a bit ahead of its time because it fits in so well now. And of course, Criterion, I think 2006 or 2007 put it out on DVD, and now it's become a cult film. But it died a death at the time. I mean, it was shown as a special film at the Cannes Film Festival. And people just sat there. Can you imagine the Cannes people sitting there, and then you've got the masturbation scene in there where he's looking at his watch. He rolls his sleeve up, and I don't think people were quite prepared for.
Right. Yeah. Ebert said it's a truly inexplicable film which had audiences filing out with sad, thoughtful faces.
Sure, but you know what? I think from Soderbergh's perspective, I think he couldn't care less because.
Right.
I think for him, he's saying. I've read some interviews with him, and the way he looks at film is he says, a lot of...
Hold that thought. We're going to take a brief break here. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood with Jay Dyer. We are talking to James Kelley.
Welcome to the Health Minute with the Health Ranger. One of the ways the system controls you and keeps you down is by literally poisoning your brain with toxic heavy metals like lead. Believe it or not, a lot of the supplements and vitamins that are sold out there are actually made by pharmaceutical companies using cheap ingredients that are contaminated with lead. And lead decreases your IQ. The more you eat, the more dumbed down you become, and that's what the system wants. But if you want to explore your maximum potential as a creative, divine, unique individual, you need to keep your mind free of toxic heavy metals like lead. And that's my specialty. I run a lab where we test all the supplements and superfoods that we offer for all the heavy metals, including lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. And that's why everything that we offer at the Talk Network store is laboratory validated for cleanliness and purity. Protect your brain by feeding it right at store.talknetwork.com.
All right, we're in the final segment here, coming close to the finish line with James Kelley. We've been discussing L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology, Hollywood, cults, and films that might relate to this topic. That would include, in our discussion, The Master, 2012 film by P.T. Anderson, and then Steven Soderbergh's 1996 film, Schizopolis. So, James, you were telling us a final thought there that you had about Schizopolis in terms of Soderbergh's view of film and interviews that you have read with him.
Sure, I think he's critical of the film as could have been more, could have been this, could have been that. But I think ultimately what Soderbergh does is, at least in his own words, he tries to go back through the whole history of cinema and kind of recapitulate it, kind of interject things into it. For, as I mentioned before, with the whole film noir thing brought up to date. And
well, it's interesting because it's in the Criterion Collection, which that would tend for film aficionados to give it some sort of credence. So it's, like you said, probably recognized later as being better than it was received by the public or at Cannes Film Festival.
Sure, it's a totally different world now, and Soderbergh helped to create the world we have now with this Sex, Lies, and Videotape being the first kind of like independent film that got a wide...
Right.
It could be a successful American film, Miramax Studios and all that stuff. So he started that, and I think that he's made some really good films, and he's made some films that are kind of, you scratch your head, but I think all of them, it's kind of like this. One film critic said of Sam Peckinpah, if you have a bad Peckinpah film on your hands, for most filmmakers, if it's a bad film, that's the end of the conversation. But with Peckinpah, it's the beginning of the conversation. Okay, the film was bad. Let's talk about it. And I think that's the same thing with Soderbergh. He's that kind of guy. His bad films are worth talking about, too.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. Definitely. Did you like Traffic, the crime drama that he did?
Yeah, I saw it when it came out, and I wasn't thinking about the director, and he does that on purpose. Soderbergh said, I don't want people to think about me as a director. I don't want to say Steven Soderbergh's Traffic. So I wasn't really thinking about it in terms of a directed film. I was just kind of enjoying it. Mm-hmm. But I need to view it again with these critical blinders on.
I did too. I saw it back. Yeah, I saw it back when it came out. And Contagion, I didn't care for Contagion. I thought it was not a very, very good film.
Yeah, he's definitely not one of those consistent directors where it's like, oh, we know what we're going to get. He's doing all kinds of things out there. But I always find it interesting that, with a director who's trying to actually do something beyond entertain, you can look at their unsuccessful films, and sometimes certain aspects of them will illuminate, his style or some
absolutely, yeah, I totally
thematic continuities from film to film. So,
yeah, I think there's a good example of that would be something like Richard Kelly, who did Donnie Darko, Southland Tales, but he also did that really weird film Domino, which is roughly kind of based on Dog the Bounty Hunter. And Domino is a just really bizarre film, but I thought it was interesting that foray into new territory. Who's thought to make this bizarre film based on a Dog the Bounty Hunter type character, but it's Keira Knightley playing this weird role. So
I'll have to look at that. I was not aware of that.
It's very, very strange. It's not. I like most of his films. I like even Southland Tales. A lot of people don't like that. I like The Box, even though it was a tribute to 2001. But Richard Kelly's Domino, and actually I don't think he directed it. I think he wrote it. So, but it's fascinating, even in the midst of its weirdness, even if it's not that great. Sometimes you can have a film that is not that good overall, but it might have some aspect to it that you really find fascinating.
Absolutely, and I hope filmmakers continue to take chances like that.
Right.
Safe way. It gets boring. It becomes a Schizopolis. If you look at Hollywood films of the 40s and 50s and before, most of them are pretty lackluster because they follow a pattern. But then that makes it all the more apparent whenever they somehow still do something that's thought-provoking. It's striking when you see a film like that. You're like, I didn't know, that they made films that had this level of thought in them, because it's our prejudice, I think, because there's so many bad Hollywood films.
So many bad cookie-cutter, blockbuster, CGI vomit type movies. And, even, I think Dustin Hoffman said a few weeks ago that he's just sick of Hollywood because they just don't make anything good. And that's kind of what happens. You have this ebb and flow where you get a period where things get really commercial, very, very consumer. They get very obsessed with something like computer-generated imagery, and it loses any of its, avant-garde, groundbreaking ethos. And then what happens is you have a reaction against that amongst, independent type filmmakers.
Absolutely. So hopefully we'll talk more in the future about films.
All right, yeah, we've got another 6 minutes, James. Tell us maybe some of your recent work, what you're planning on doing, and more about where we can look up your theology, your philosophy, and what we can expect from James Kelley.
Sure. The main thing that people that are interested in what we're talking about need to have is Anonymizing Divinity, my 2011 book.
Tell us a little bit about that book, because it will actually play into what we've been talking about. So if you could, maybe in a couple minutes, just give us kind of a rundown of what that's about.
Anonymizing Divinity is basically saying, okay, we have Western culture as we know it today. The scientific element, the emphasis on science, certain themes in the entertainment culture. Where does this all come from? So I make some speculations and do a sort of history of ideas of the West, and I make a lot of attempts to relate it to magic, Western esotericism, the rejected knowledge of the West, which actually rears its head so often that we wonder, is it really rejected? Is alchemy really off the table for Western culture that spawned the scientific revolution, or is it more central than we think? Right. Now, this relates to, you can take the ideas from Anonymizing Divinity and relate it to everything I've done since then. So if you just like my writings about, zombie mass, or if you like my writings about films and cult leaders, well, some of the underpinnings, the ideas behind it are you're going to find the development of those ideas in Anonymizing Divinity. So that's on Amazon.com, or you can go to the Trine Day website, TRINEDAY, great publisher, and get Anonymizing Divinity. Now, as far as articles and things I've written, these are going to be collected together into books in the future. And I'm going to have a book about cult leaders, or it probably won't be titled Cult Leaders, but it will be about new religious movements, and I may relate it to film. I may do this and that. I may have a psychobiographical approach, as I've done with Jim Jones.
Yeah, you've got some interesting essays that are at romeosign.wordpress.com on both Nation of Islam and Jim Jones, correct?
Yeah, and those will be chapters in a book soon, hopefully, and that's romeosyne.wordpress.com. And I'm Jamie Kelley, JamieKelley. I know so often I've tried to follow up with things I've listened to, and I can't find it. So do everything we can to get people over there.
Yeah, well, we got a few more minutes here. So tell us a little bit more about, how does alchemy relate to Western theology or the history of ideas?
Well, I'll just give you one example. At the beginning, at the fountainhead of Western culture, Western philosophy, the pre-Socratics, those who led into Plato and Aristotle, their main concern was the four elements and what preceded them. What did the four elements come out of? Earth, air, fire, and so what did those come out of? And so that led to theories about, let's run the process backward and create this one element that has everything in it in a potential state. And we find this idea in Greek, not only philosophy, but also in the mythology as well, with Hesiod's theogony. We have the idea that everything comes out of chaos, and chaos has everything and its opposite in it at once. Well, this is alchemical theory, takes its lead from this. And not only that, but it becomes operative, I argue, in the theology of Western Christianity, and then later just the secular, the immanentized, as you said, eschaton of secular thinking is based on some of these alchemical ideas, I argue. It's fully referenced with a lot of footnotes, so if people want to get into and read everything I've read, it's really heavy on footnotes. And that's good for some people because they want to follow up and say, well, how do you know this? And I'm very big on trying to show how I do know what I think I know.
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, that is a wild run through a diverse field of topics there. I think we covered some fascinating ground here. And you and I talked about Nation of Islam, and we talked about Jim Jones, and we talked about Scientology. What next in terms of the cult ethos do you plan to look at?
Heaven's Gate.
Interesting. What's your overall 1-2 sentence analysis of Heaven's Gate? What do you make of that?
Well, I think Heaven's Gate, more than anything, is taking UFO religion and then it's taking kind of Left Behind type eschatology from the Bible, and it's melding it together, and it's coming from the perspective of two people who are conflicted about their sexuality. T and Doe, I think they call themselves. Bo and Peep.
Oh, yeah, little Bo Peep, yeah, whatever.
So they're interested. It all sort of seems to come from their own sexual misconduct.
Well, that's a theme we've seen quite a bit through a lot of these cults, as well as in Hollywood, right?
That's what makes it fascinating. You can say, well, here's this valence. It's their own sexuality, and then we're going to see how they interacted with others around them, and then they created an organization based on this misfunction and started running people through it.
All right, and the site is, again, romeosign.wordpress.com. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I was your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So I want to thank James for joining me, and if you go to jaysanalysis.com, you can follow me there through my Facebook or through the site itself, through your email. You can also sign up for my philosophy lectures. You can look for my forthcoming book, Esoteric Hollywood's Cults, Signs, Cults, and Symbols in Film. And you can get James's book, Anonymizing Divinity, as well. And I want to remind you to go to j.talknetwork.com. You'll see links at my site that will take you to the Talk Network /Natural News product store. And there you can find all of your holiday needs for those of you who are interested in health and living an organic lifestyle.
The Activation Hour.
I will not comply with the alternative media. I don't have a Facebook. I don't want a Facebook. I'm not getting a Facebook, so stop telling me to get a Facebook. I don't share my life with the NSA. I don't take selfies. And if you mention Instagram in conversation, my brain will go on strike and leave the building. I've got a website, a blog, and an email. That's enough. And I don't tweet either. This is Sharon on TalkNetwork.com.
The Activation Hour, Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern.
What you're missing on Get Connected.
Right now we're at a tipping point. That's my feeling about Bitcoin, Let's, time banking. There's a ton of access points for us to begin sharing or even become a part of the new marketplace. But if we don't tune in to who we are and the power of our creativity, we're going to fall right back into what we already know as the economy.
Get Connected with Brandy Vale. Saturdays at 4 p.m. Eastern on TalkNetwork.com.
I'm a lover and a fighter. I believe in risk. I'm addicted to success. I don't need laws because I've got respect. I help the old, the youth, and the misguided because this may be all we got. I admire love and relations, just not sure of the true Webster's definition of it all. Then again, who is Webster and why did he get his own dictionary? Because no one asked me. But hey, it's time we start living for ourselves and follow our own constitution. It's time we break the conditioning and the manipulation and start to understand our own human conditions.
Sundays at 9 p.m. Pacific.
IDP Consulting Group is a full-service precious metals brokerage firm that specializes in pure bullion for physical, delivery, and commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. Precious metals have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for wealth protection and an excellent way to hedge against risky markets in uncertain times. You can call 855-860-6800 for a no-obligation consultation, and the professionals at IDP Consulting Group can also assist with converting IRA accounts into a precious metals IRA for safekeeping and flexibility. A transfer or rollover is a penalty-free transaction and can afford tax-deferred capital gains with low annual fees. IDP can also assist clients with secure segregated and non-segregated depository accounts with precious metals in a fully bonded and secured facility for convenience and reliable storage. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 or visit idpconsultinggroup.com.